Hello, I'm Judy Muller. During this presentation, we're going to give you some general tips that journalists need to know to report ethically and within the law. There are laws in place to help reporters get access to information that the public needs to know. But the courts have consistently ruled that journalists are not above the law. There is much more to know than what we'll be able to cover here. But we hope this presentation will alert you to some of the issues you need to be aware of and to help you know when to seek help. At any point in your reporting, if you have doubts or questions about your legal rights, ask your advisors, teachers, and editors for help. So let's get started. First off, we're going to talk about how to keep you safe while you're out reporting. Safety is your first priority. So before even getting the news story, when in doubt about a possibly dangerous situation, don't take any chances. So whether you're working in the middle of a huge protest or sharing information online, you must stay aware of what's going on around you. Bronte Lawson is here to tell us about a situation she confronted while working as a reporter at ATVN. Bronte?
I was assigned a story about a gunman who was on the loose in Echo Park. And my executive producer asked me to go to the area and to shoot some video of a school that had been evacuated. Once I got there, I noticed that an older man had started following me. I was shooting with my camera and tripod, and he was just kind of trailing behind me. So at first I brushed it off. I thought, no big deal, I can handle it. He was speaking in Spanish, and so I couldn't really understand him. But as time went on, he got closer and closer and a lot more aggressive. And he started speaking in English, and I noticed that he was whispering some vulgar things. And so I started to get a little bit nervous, and so I started hurrying towards my car, which was parked near the school. The quicker I got, the quicker he got. And eventually he started chasing me. I was terrified, and I yelled back at him saying that I would use my tripod as a weapon if necessary, but he just laughed. Luckily, I made it to my car, and I flung my bag inside. I actually ended up scratching the whole side of my car, but the moral of the story is I made it back to the newsroom safely. Looking back, I should have told my EP that given the area and the scenario, that I was really uncomfortable going alone. And when I first noticed that the man was following me, I should have gone straight back to my car. I should have put my safety first.
Thank you. Thanks, Bronte. Here are some important guidelines when you're reporting. Get familiar with the places where you're reporting. Print out maps so you have a hard copy with you at all times. When you go to an interview alone, make sure someone knows where you're going and how to reach you at all times. Be sure your cell phone's fully charged and fill your car with at least a half a tank of gas. Carry at least one form of ID with you, and make sure people at the location know you're a reporter. Make sure you have money with you, but don't carry too much. And only carry valuables that you need for your reporting, such as a camera or a tripod. Leave fancy jewelry, purses, and expensive electronics at home. Think about what you're wearing. Is it appropriate? Could it make you a potential target? Avoid baseball caps and message t-shirts, as well as revealing clothing. Business casual clothing is always best, but if you're unsure, talk to your editor. Wherever you park, make sure there are people around and that it's not deserted. If it's dark, park under lights and near attendants or places where there's activity. This is just common sense. Walk confidently and with a sense of purpose. If you feel like someone's following you, turn around and look right at them. Stay in populated areas and create separation between you and the person who may be following you. Contact police or call 911. When reporting in a neighborhood where you don't feel safe or that you're unfamiliar with, use the buddy system. Be sure you stick together in the field. Make contact with a person or business in the area. Restaurants are often good places. Be careful about using social media to share personal information, such as your location or where you live. You hear it all the time. Some celebrity, business, or average Joe sues for defamation. You want to make sure you're not the reporter on the other end of that lawsuit. Let's consider this situation. There was a deadly shooting overnight a mile from campus. A 42-year-old mother of 3 children is dead, and police have arrested her husband on suspicion of murder. Your editor tells you to head to the neighborhood. She tells you, catch some color and chat up the neighbors about the kind of person who would have done this. So you hop on your bike and pedal fast. You easily spot the house. It's the one with all the police cars parked in front and yellow caution tape around the front yard. The mailbox has the couple's name, Marge and Ralph Whitman, and it's covered in blood. You go up to a bearded man wearing a dark suit and a cowboy hat who says his name is Jasper Higgins. He starts talking nonstop about the couple. He tells you, "I heard the Whitmans arguing all the time. They were having money problems. The old man was distraught. He was a cocaine dealer, and he was always getting ripped off by his clients." You find a next-door neighbor, 83-year-old Carl Yount, a retired firefighter. He says he'd often see the Whitmans tending radishes and tulips at the community garden. He tells you, "I found Ralph to be very annoying, especially when he tossed weeds into my broccoli patch. And when I complained, he was grumpy and seemed strange. He was a royal jerk." You interview a few more people on your iPhone, jot down some notes, and snap some photos of the neighborhood, and then head back to the newsroom. You write your story, but when the final edit is handed back to you, half the quotes are removed from your story. You start to blow a fuse, especially over the Higgins quote. "I heard the Whitmans arguing all the time. They were having money problems. The old man was distraught. He was a cocaine dealer and getting ripped off by his clients." You tell the senior editor you thought the cocaine dealing quote was okay to use because it was clearly the view of the neighbor, and it's in quotes. But here's why she took it out. If you're quoting someone saying something, you're responsible for it because you're publishing it. It's the same as if you said it yourself, even if you put quotes around it. The test for defamation is whether the comments are false statements of fact and could hurt someone's reputation with their friends or their social group. That comment about being a cocaine dealer could qualify. Yount's comments about his neighbor, the jerk, are okay because they amount to name calling. They're vague and an opinion. Like with most things, exceptions exist. Under something called the fair report privilege, you can use the comments that Higgins made if you find them in police reports, or if they were said at a police news conference, in court papers, or in government proceedings. You can also quote anything said as part of public meetings at places like City Hall. The fair report privilege gives journalists broad rights to publish what is said in a public government proceeding. It's a cornerstone of our democracy and ensures the public's business is conducted in full view of the public. We also want to point out an important distinction. Libel is the legal term for a written defamatory statement. Slander is the legal term for an oral statement. One note about using generic images in a story. Say you're doing a story about the rates of HIV going up in teenage girls. You cannot show generic video or a general photo of teenage girls because you could be implying that the girls shown in the video have HIV. That's known as false light. Either don't use the photo or video at all, or only use it if the girls' faces are not identifiable. Journalists often encounter someone telling them they don't have the right to be taking photos, recording, or reporting from a particular location because it's private property. It's important to know your rights when covering stories on private property. Vicki Chen is here now to share an experience she had covering a story at the downtown LA jail. Vicki?
During my junior year, I was assigned a story about the Los Angeles County jail system. When I arrived at the jail downtown, I parked my car across the street and set up my camera and tripod on the sidewalk across the intersection from the jail. I shot some wide shots of the building, then crossed the street to get some B-roll of the entrance and some sheriff's deputy vehicles. I shot some medium and close-up shots of the vehicles, the building entrance, some signs, and even the California flag out front. On my way back to the car, I was stopped by two male sheriff's deputies. They asked who I was and why I had a camera. I explained what I was doing, and they asked if I had permission from the PR department to shoot video. I said no, but I was confused because I had been taught that I could shoot any video from a public sidewalk, and I didn't think that at the time I was intruding on any non-public property. But the two deputies were pretty intimidating and made it seem like I needed special permission to shoot video at the jail. Since I'd never shot B-roll at that location before, I was unsure if there was indeed a special rule. Then two other deputies were called over, one male and one female, and one of the original two deputies asked to see my footage. So facing those four deputies, I showed them. He demanded to know why I was shooting video of deputy vehicles, and I said it was just for generic B-roll to illustrate the story, not to target specific officers or cars. He said I couldn't do that and demanded that I delete all of my video. Under the pressure of four deputies and not knowing my rights clearly, I went ahead and deleted it. At this point, the deputy asked for my driver's license and took it away to run some sort of check on it. I was so shaken up that by now I was crying. The female officer tried to comfort me by saying, "Well, at least now you know, and this will make you a tougher journalist." And in retrospect, this makes me so mad because clearly all 4 officers were harassing me with no legal basis. Eventually, they really couldn't find any reason to take further action, so they returned my ID and let me go. I returned to my car and called the newsroom, tearfully explaining what had just happened to my executive producer. I returned to the newsroom embarrassed and frustrated because I felt I had been unfairly harassed.
Thank you. Courts have concluded that reporters or photojournalists can't be prosecuted if the scene captured on film could have been observed from places open to the public. But if Vicky was on public property shooting something that could have been seen by anyone else driving or walking down the street, she was on solid ground, and she certainly didn't need permission from a PR rep. She also did not have to show the deputies her footage and did not need to delete any of it. It's easy to get rattled in a situation like this, but if it ever happens to you, ask to call the newsroom and talk to your advisor or editor before you rely on what the police are telling you. There is also property that is privately owned but quasi-public, like USC, which is a private university, a shopping center, or a sports arena. Reporters must still get permission from the owner in those cases, but there's a key difference. You or anyone else can walk onto the USC campus or Staples Center, but you would only be considered to be trespassing if you refuse to leave if you're asked. If you're ever covering a public meeting and you're told to leave, you may not have to. As a general rule, if it's a public institution, you have a right to be there and see how tax dollars are being spent, as long as you're not disturbing regular business. However, there can be closed sessions that reporters cannot attend. In California, the reasons for that are to discuss personnel issues, to consult with a bargaining agent on negotiating property purchases or employee salaries, or to consult with an attorney on pending litigation. Here's the bottom line. If it's a private home or business, you must get permission to enter. If it's private property that is quasi-public, leave the premises if you're asked to. And if you're on public property shooting images or video of private property, you're okay. We all know how chatty people can be until they find out we're a reporter and want to quote them by name in our publication or on our broadcast. As tempting as it can be, we must make sure that we fully identify ourselves as journalists before we begin interviews, and we can't claim to be someone else under any circumstances. Practice introducing yourself in front of the mirror, and don't say, "Hello, this is Judy Muller. I'm a student at USC Annenberg. I'm working on a story about your business." Many people don't want to waste time talking to a student. Instead, say something like this. "Hi, this is Judy Muller, a reporter at Annenberg TV News at USC. I'm working on a story for our nightly newscast about what the city's proposed increase in the business tax could mean for your computer store." Be specific and make it clear while you're calling. Whatever you do, don't mislead people. Of course, you'll hear about exceptions. You'll read case studies about reporters who go undercover to expose corrupt practices in the business. And you'll read about reporters who promise sources they'll remain confidential and end up naming them in their stories. In cases like these, the reporters often end up getting sued. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. You don't want to put yourself or your publication at unnecessary risk. A good rule to live by before launching any questionable reporting project that relies on misleading anyone about your identity as a reporter: make sure you have the blessings of your higher-ups. You may need their help paying your legal bills. As journalists, we take particular care with minors because they're vulnerable and less aware of what's appropriate. When you show photos or video of children, check with an editor to make sure it's appropriate. Interviewing minors can also be tricky. Let's take this hypothetical scenario. Your editor assigned you to do a story about the pressing question of where to get the best carne asada taco in all of Los Angeles. A source tells you it's Suave's on Figueroa, and you're off to find out what's in the secret sauce. A boy of about 10 years old is sitting on a skateboard in front of the truck. He tells you he's the owner's son. His name is Jose Suave Jr. You asked him if he knows the secret to why everyone loves Calientito's carne asada. Of "Of course," he says in an authoritative voice, "we mix horse meat in the marinade." You think you've got the scoop of a lifetime, but when you tell your editor the story, she frowns and says, "Not so fast." The best practice is to always try to get the consent of the parents before you interview minors, especially when you're talking about sensitive issues. There's no law saying you need parental consent, and places open to the public like parks, streets, sidewalks, and public buildings are considered public forums where journalists are free to photograph, record, and interview. Schools are another matter. There are no state laws that bar the media from school grounds outright, but individual school districts may have regulations limiting access to school property. In California, administrators have the authority to deny reporters access to school grounds if their presence would interfere with peaceful conduct of the activities of the school. Bottom line, when it comes to any story involving children, proceed cautiously. If you want to enter a school in California, you should get permission first from the administrators. The best practice is to get parental consent when possible, especially if the interview is related to a sensitive subject or if the child's too young to realize the potential consequences of what he or she says. At some point in your reporting career, you may conduct a recorded telephone interview, either for air or just to use as notes. It's important to know there are federal and state laws which govern the recording of phone conversations, as well as in-person private conversations that take place in public places. We are only going to tell you about California law, but you should learn the law in whatever state you're working in. California has what's known as a two-party consent law. That means it's illegal to record any telephone call or private conversation without the consent of all the parties involved. In a phone conversation, do not assume the interviewee knows you are recording, just because you say it's for radio or TV. You must make it clear you will record the conversation and you must receive their consent. Here's how to handle it. When you first call to arrange the interview, let the contact know you want to record an interview over the telephone. After you have begun recording, say something like, "I want to confirm with you that I'll be recording this interview." Make sure they give some kind of verbal assent. That way, if there's any question later on as to whether they were informed, you have the recorded verification. As a journalist, it's essential to have a basic understanding of both copyright and fair use. Journalists rely on the fair use doctrine every day, but you need to be aware that this is an area of the law that can be uncertain and is constantly changing. This overview should help you assess the best way to deal with many situations you'll encounter in a newsroom or in the field. Let's start with the definition of copyright. Copyright is the right of an author, journalist, artist, or other creator to control certain uses of his or her work by others. Generally speaking, a work that is copyrighted may not be copied, distributed, or performed publicly without permission of the creator. Derivative works such as translations, adaptations, or sequels also can't be created without the author's permission. To qualify for copyright protection, the work must be original and the result of some creative effort. It doesn't matter if an author's creation is lacking in quality. If it's original, it's protected by copyright for the author's life plus 70 years. To be protected, it has to be written down, recorded, or saved to a hard drive. Copyright law applies even in cyberspace. A work that's only available electronically is eligible for copyright protection, the same as any other work. Just because it's freely available on the internet does not mean that it's in the public domain or free to use. Some things that are not protected by copyright, such as ideas, concepts, and principles. Also facts, words, phrases, familiar symbols, and works created by the US government cannot be copyrighted. Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization that produces licenses creators can attach to their content. These licenses allow other people to use their work without payment. There are millions of photos, blogs, and websites that are licensed by Creative Commons that you can use freely. Often the only condition is that they be used for non-commercial purposes and that you give credit to the original author. You can search for content licensed by Creative Commons on Flickr, Google, and many other sites. Just go to search.creativecommons.org. Copyright laws extend to music. And music creators can be some of the most vigorous in protecting their works. USC has broad performance rights licenses from ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, but they only cover audio, not video. These rights allow students to play recordings or perform songs licensed by these 3 catalogs. For music and songs that are not licensed to USC, or for video that includes music, it may be possible to apply a fair use, such as when a piece of music becomes a news story itself. Again, if you want to use copyrighted material, the safest course is to get permission from the copyright owner before using it. If you can't get the okay, the best course may be to avoid the use of copyrighted material unless you're confident that fair use would apply. If there's any doubt, consult a newsroom manager or the university through your editor, advisor, or teacher. Now let's look at fair use and how we can assess whether copyrighted material can qualify. Matt Hamilton is here to tell us how he handled a fair use issue. Matt?
I was doing a package for my broadcast reporting class on runaway production in Hollywood. Runaway production is when studios shoot television and movies in other states or countries in order to save money. I wanted to open my piece with a clip from the Academy Award-winning movie, The Artist. My instructor told us that if we used video sourced from YouTube or another digital site, we should limit the clip to just the amount needed to make the point, attribute the source in the upper right corner, and ensure that the video is relevant to the actual story, not just put in for the sake of doing so. I made sure that the video I chose from The Artist was relevant to the main subject of my package. I had found a costumer who had actually worked on the production, and it was one of his last jobs in the area. Also, an added bonus was that the arc of the movie itself, changing economics and technology in Hollywood, aligned with the themes of runaway production.
Thanks, Matt. Journalists rely on fair use every day to report the news. Here's the definition. Fair use is a legal doctrine that allows the use of copyrighted materials without the permission of the copyright owner and without paying to use it. Fair use allows journalists to use and build upon copyrighted works in a way that adds to our collective knowledge and understanding and does not unfairly deprive copyright owners of the right to benefit financially from their works. The Supreme Court has referred to fair use as a safety valve because it's what keeps copyright from running roughshod over the First Amendment right of freedom of speech. Because of fair use rules, we can criticize a film without getting permission or make fun of things through parody or satire. It's why we can quote from a public speech or why we can film a protest march without muting out the protest songs or blurring out all the t-shirts with pictures of Che Guevara on them. The distinction between what's fair use and what is copyright infringement is not always clear or easily defined. There is no specific number of words, lines, or length of video that may be safely taken without permission. And acknowledging the source of the copyrighted material does not substitute for getting that permission. Here are 3 key questions to ask yourself before applying fair use. Are you using the material to support, illustrate, or demonstrate a point? Are you only using as much material as is reasonable in service of making that point? And is the connection between the original material and the point you're trying to make clear to the average reader or viewer? Social media have become an important tool in the reporting process. Paresh Dave is here now to talk about using a Facebook photo for a story. Paresh?
Hello. On December 14th, 2012, a young man walked into a school in Newtown, Connecticut, and opened fire. He shot 20 students and 6 faculty members. Now, in the immediate aftermath of this incident, CNN reported that the shooter was Ryan Lanza. They cited a government official, but it turned out the shooter was actually his brother, Adam Lanza. But CNN pulled up Ryan Lanza's Facebook page and put Ryan Lanza's photo all over the TV. And us at Neon Tommy had to decide, do we want to put Ryan Lanza's photo out there on the internet now and agree with CNN that the shooter was Ryan Lanza, or did we want to hold back and wait until police officials actually came out and identified the shooter? Well, we decided we would name the shooter as CNN had done and attribute it to them, that it was Ryan Lanza. But we held off from posting his Facebook photo and details from his Facebook page. But we did put out on our Facebook page that the shooter was Ryan Lanza, and it's still there now.
Thank you, Paresh. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social media are useful reporting tools, but remember, it's vitally important to verify the information you find on those sites. When there's a breaking news situation, unverified information is all over Facebook and Twitter. Many journalists and editors say you should be transparent in your reporting when you use information in stories from social media sites by attributing whatever information you get from those sites. Content on Facebook is protected under copyright laws, and using it isn't necessarily fair use. Photographs on Facebook are good examples. If someone posts a photo on their Facebook page that they didn't take, you don't necessarily have the right to violate that photographer's copyright privileges, especially if you're using it in a for-profit newsroom. The same is true for videos on YouTube. The best course of action is to get permission from the person who took the photograph. In some news situations, it may be possible to claim fair use if it meets the 3 guidelines for applying fair use, and especially if the page is public. In general, the greater the privacy settings, the less kosher it is to use the photograph or private information that's posted on that page. Always discuss these cases with your advisor. Also, consider the ethical standards at play here when it comes to using private information obtained from a Facebook post. The bar is higher when it's information about ordinary people rather than celebrities, politicians, and other high-profile newsmakers. As the SPJ Code of Ethics says, only an overriding public need can justify intrusion into anyone's privacy. Sites like Facebook are good tools to get information. They're also great platforms for promoting your journalistic work, but there can be pitfalls in how you use them. Even though journalists must take care not to violate privacy rights, you should realize that nothing on social media is really private. If you express an opinion about a source or a news story on your personal Facebook page or on Twitter, you can open yourself up to criticism that you're biased. Also, take care when you like an opinionated Facebook post or retweet a political candidate's tweet because it could be seen as advocacy. Reporters often get requests from the sources they're interviewing to either see the questions ahead of time or to see the story you've written before it's published. Josanta Gray has faced this problem a number of times. Josanta?
Well, in my experience, lawyers are infamous for asking for questions prior to an interview. I was interning at CBSNews.com this past summer, and I pitched a story about HIV criminalization that my editor wanted me to complete, but it involved talking to a man who was about to be released from prison. The lawyer wanted to know in detail what I planned to ask the man because I was the first reporter to talk to him upon his release. Similarly, a few months ago, I was sent to interview a wrongfully convicted man for Our Weekly. Upon his release, his lawyer also wanted to know in detail what I planned to ask him. In response, I generally never give them specific questions. I only give them an overview of the topics I plan to hit, which could be personal life experiences, thoughts and feelings of the time of the event, or advice to other prisoners, that sort of thing.
Thank you very much. Josetta's response was right on. There are generally 2 reasons why sources ask for questions in advance. People who aren't used to being interviewed are often nervous about sounding articulate, and they want to be as prepared as possible. Not so easy are the people who are involved in a controversial story and are wary about being asked questions that will be uncomfortable, make them look guilty, or show them in a negative light. There are some basic do's and don'ts when it comes to interview requests. If the source insists on a list of specific questions, do provide broad and neutral questions, but make it clear those are among the questions you will ask, and you will likely have others. Do give the least amount of information you can get away with. If a source is crucial to your story, do consider an email response. In fact, for sources who are frequently interviewed, a succinct emailed quote can work fine in a text story. Obviously, in radio and TV, the goal is to get in-person or on-the-phone interviews. But if you do use an email response, acknowledge in your story that it was answered via email. There's nothing wrong with being general about the scope of your story, but do not deliberately deceive the source about what you're reporting on in order to get the interview. That opens you up to charges of misrepresentation. Sometimes sources will ask to preview your story before it's published. This is a bad practice, and it's something you do not want to do. Sometimes you might want to check a quote, fact, or portion of an article or script for accuracy with a source, but do not ever give them editorial control over the story. Remember that everyone you interview has a point of view, and sources may try to manipulate you into shaping the story in their favor. As you can see, there are a lot of gray areas in laws that apply to journalists, and it's an area of the law that's changing quickly. As a journalist, you need to keep up on both the legal and ethical issues at play during the reporting and publishing process, not only to keep you safe from liability, but also to further your ability to report important stories. There are many resources online to help you wade through the legal and ethical questions. But when in doubt, always discuss your questions, however slight, with your editor, advisor, or teacher. Thanks for your attention. And now, if you'll take out a piece of paper and a pen, we have a small quiz for you. Just kidding. Thanks.